Initially, the conversation around hybrid working was trust. Oh, I need to have you in the office because I don't trust you. Or I feel like that the conversation has moved to be much more focused on the value of humans being together.
Dr. Kirsten Brown is an experienced workplace strategy and wellbeing consultant with a PhD in health in the workplace. She's a thought leader and expert in building health and resilience in organisations for a more productive workforce. She currently works as a self-employed consultant, having been involved in all aspects of workplace consultancy, from design, real estate, commerce and research.
We're dealing with humans. Every human's different. The work that we do, the way we deal with our managers, there's no magic formula.
What are those things, design changes or office structural things that you are finding or you personally are pushing for as evidence-based?
Well, I think in terms of the evidence, the factors that really impact people's health is the air quality and the access to daylight. Sometimes any career, what makes you good at it is actually just longevity. Like doing it for a long time. There's a lot of stuff that you just can't know without experience. I don't know whether you've ever heard that expression that people say, oh, you should work in an organisation that the values align with your values. Just like, oh, what does that actually mean? But it wasn't until I worked in a place that the values didn't align with my values that I understood it very loud and clear.
Kirsten, thank you so much for joining me.
It's so good to be here.
I usually start by asking our guests why architecture, but I think given your sort of diverse career, I think the question is a bit more nuanced, if you would agree. So I suppose across all of your roles, the sort of common denominator theme seems to be a sort of thread about people's relationships with their environment. What is it about this that kind of fascinates you?
Well, I suppose there's so many dimensions to it. I suppose I started out in landscape architecture because I found that really interesting, the relationship between how people respond and enjoy more of an external environment. While I was at school, I was really interested in natural systems. I did, biology and geography, geology, etc. And that sort of led me on that path to understand the natural environment, in more of a design sense. So I suppose that's where it started. And then to build on that in terms of how people respond to it is that the next area of study I wanted to understand was actually from the client perspective, how they see projects and what is important to them. So, and then later in my career, in that really in-depth research part, again, it's how people, what's important to people, how we can actually elevate the experience, whether it's interior or exterior, and really make places and spaces that people thrive in.
Let's talk about the early sort of experience of landscape architecture. Like that's obviously a design background, and you later go on to go more into sort of research and sales and lots of different things. But what was it that kind of initially kind of drew you to landscapes in particular?
Well, it's actually quite funny because when I had, this is a long time ago, well, actually there wasn't even the internet when I went to uni, and it was a book. It was a book produced by the university. It was a paragraph with 2 sentences in it describing what the degree was about, amongst all the other degrees, and that's how you chose it. That was it. I must say I didn't actually have a full understanding of what I was getting myself into when I chose this degree from 2 sentences in a book. I was sort of quite surprised at, while it was all about natural systems, and the environment and botany, et cetera, obviously design is at the center of it. And probably design is not my strength. But I stuck at it because I found learning about the design process, the way you go through it's quite a different way of thinking when you actually step through it and you're trained in terms of how you view the world and how you take parts of, how you solve problems. So I think that's how I, I started on that path, and then 4 years later, finished it. I think the other major part that really ignited my interest and continued with landscape, I had a opportunity to go to a university in America, to the University of Illinois. And landscape architecture as a profession was much more highly regarded, and respected, and was much more, it wasn't just sort of something on the side that came after architecture. It
Sure.
was actually integrated into projects. So, yeah, that sort of got me started on the process, but it was probably more by accident, really.
You'd be surprised how many people that say that.
Yeah, but, that's life, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, completely. How long did you practice, in landscape architecture before you moved over to sort of the real estate world?
It was probably about a decade. I By then I had 2 young children, and I suppose I started to move away from it because I just wasn't enjoying it enough. I found it, very long hours. I wasn't 100% passionate about it. I was at a point where if I was going to be away from my children, putting them in daycare, etc., it had to really count. I had to really want to be loving the work I did.
What was that next step into real estate? What was it that kind of drew you to that area of kind of the built environment?
The reason why I wanted to undertake that study, a more formal study, is that I found often in projects, particularly the way landscape was positioned in as part of the project, and it's amazing to see now because we're so much more focused on the environment and natural systems. Is that landscape as a profession is much more pivotal in projects. So back then, because it wasn't as valued, I really wanted to understand what were the drivers from the client end. So, what were the key things? What did they place value on, and why? Why did they place value on particular parts of projects? So that's when I started to really become more interested in, yeah, that end of how does a deal stack up? How is a project formed? How and why are these the parameters, and the design? How does the design process fit into that?
Yeah, it's fascinating because I mean, I've had so many sort of friends and colleagues that get probably in a similar sort of situation, get to that sort of point in their career where they want more of an understanding, like yourself, of the bigger picture of the overarching idea around how things get built and how I suppose development actually happens. And was that? I mean, was there much sort of transferable skills from landscape into that realm, or is that quite a sort of fresh start and you were kind of starting
Oh,
anew with
no,
that?
it's all useful. I mean, and that's often what people say, "Oh," and I even see my children at university now, and, "Oh, it's all weight,
Mm,
I shouldn't have done that, I shouldn't," no study or, learning is wasted. And even now, every day, all and maybe the plant names aren't so relevant in my daily life, but the process, the thinking, the way design is all about problem solving, in a quite a clever way. So I that even was relevant when I approached my PhD. And what was super interesting is my supervisor said, "Oh, many people that undertake a PhD find it very difficult to, they do some work, they write it, and then they might just have to bin big sections of it because it becomes as you work through the journey, it's not relevant,
sure.
or it goes in different directions." And that's what design is. That design process is that sometimes you head down a path and you have to go a bit to the left to know that a bit to the left is the wrong decision, or a bit to the right that, and it's iterative. You're constantly refining it, and never a straight path. So those skills, definitely, are useful, and I've still used those today.
So from client side, we jump now into sort of product side, product sales,
Yeah,
marketing,
yeah.
um, obviously in the sort of commercial interiors. And that's something you spent quite a period of time. I know you worked at Herman Miller for a long time.
Mm.
What was that experience like with a different sort of focus, I suppose?
Look, the reason when I was at that point in my career, I was very specific about where I chose to work. So I know sometimes it's difficult when you come to that crossroads about, okay, what do I want to do? What am I good at? Where would I like to work? I was really clear. I actually had created a list of the companies that I wanted to work for. So I had
Okay.
previously had a stint in a construction company, and I wasn't, I don't know whether you've ever heard that expression that people say, "Oh, you should work in an organization that the values align with your values." And I never really understood what that meant. It's like, "Oh, what does that actually mean?" But it wasn't until I worked in a place that the values didn't align with my values, that I understood it very loud and clear. Just a very old school construction company that just didn't for a whole bunch of reasons. Anyway, so I had a very clear list. Here are the types of companies that I would like to work for. One of them was Herman Miller. The reason being is that everything they do is it's very design focused. It's
Mm.
very considered. It's built on evidence. It's very anything that they create. It often I mean timeless is probably too strong a word, but it all the way they go about their processes. I thought was a place that aligned again with my values. Um, so that there and in Australia, there were at that time and still today, there's only 4 or 5 Herman Miller people in Australia. So they're not jobs that come around very often. I so a job came around, yeah, and I applied for it and was successful. So yeah, super interesting company. And what I find fascinating about that company is that they have managed to capture history and culture that was built by a few very special individuals, that, Ray and Charles
Mm.
Eames and other people of that era. It's still embedded into their culture every day in everything they design. And that is pretty unique, I think.
Sure. I mean, it sounds like a sort of glowing review of your experience there. What was that sort of yeah, how many years were you there? It was more than 10,
Oh,
wasn't it?
8, yeah, about 8 years, 8, 9 years,
Yeah,
yeah.
8
Yeah,
years.
yeah,
What was your experience sort of moving through that company? Because I know that there was a sort of sales role, marketing role, and
yeah.
then into a more sort of an exploratory thing that probably led on to your PhD.
Yeah. Look, what I spoke there was lots of things, as I said, yeah, the company is as itself I was, aligned with and really enjoyed. The role itself, I was the only person in Sydney, based in Sydney, so it was very autonomous. To be completely frank, it also really it was really helpful, at the period of where I was in my life. I had 2 young children. I needed fully flexible living and working.
Sure.
And then a lot of flexible jobs just didn't exist. No, flexible was, oh, did you want to pick your children up one day a week or something?
Yeah.
So the role was fully autonomous. I'm a motivated and hardworking person, so I just get on and do things. Um, and it led me, and I built a whole lot of skills around, working with people, managing the dealers, learning how products, how things are put together. And then, yes, as you said, I started on the journey of research there because that they obviously do huge amounts of research for their products. Yeah, and I teamed up actually before I started at Herman Miller. I remember now they had a researcher coming to Australia to understand workplace here, because it is tends to be a little bit more forward thinking than the US market. And they
Mm.
need the person needed an assistant. The researcher needed an assistant. I said, "Okay, I'll do it." Yeah, so that was my first sort of bite and look at what does research look like in from an industry perspective.
What was it that made you decide to jump into a PhD? Did it kind of naturally flow from the work you were doing and kind of felt like a sort of natural extension of that? Or was it, I mean, did you have a
Well,
burning desire to do it?
no, no, it not actually. What again? It's funny how these things happen. So it was at a stage. I'm not sure whether you remember, but about 10 years ago, every headline related to interiors and workplace was "Sitting is the new smoking." Do you remember that?
Mm.
You know
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
headline,
yeah.
"Sitting is," and it was everywhere. It was everywhere, and every conference you went to, and everyone was always talking about it, "Sitting is the new smoking. We're all going to die because we sit too much." Um, I was really intrigued by that. I'm quite a curious person. I was like, "Okay, I want to actually understand what is behind these headlines that people it's
Mm,
everywhere." And when I started unpicking it and doing a little bit of research, I found that behind those headlines were 5 people for 5 days, 3 people for 6 days. The actual size of the experiments, or what was being the data that was making these headlines, was pretty, loose. It wasn't I wouldn't have rated that, yeah. So, I don't actually even know how I then decided, "Oh, okay, maybe I should, do a little bit more." So I just started inch by inch, started doing some research. And then to do a PhD here in Australia, you pretty much pitch to a university and say, "Here's my idea, here's what I wanna research," and then you're funded by the federal government. And so I ended up in the Faculty of Health, which was on which I chose to do because I wanted to have a lot of rigor, that sort of health rigor to the research
mm,
rather than more design. Um, and initially it started off as a as a more of a master's in research, and then they were saying, "Oh, this topic's way too big and complicated. You need to do a PhD." I was like, "Oh, do I? Okay, I'll do one." So
sure.
so so, yeah, again, it wasn't a conscious, "Okay, I really wanna do this, and
Mm.
this is something that is a life idea." It really came about just in probably the same way as I started my bachelor degree.
Okay, I'm gonna tell everyone what the title of the PhD is: the relationship between workplace design and perceived health status of office workers, a salutogenic perspective. Could you just tell us a little bit about your findings?
Yeah, okay. So the way I undertook the study in the end is that I used a case study of an organization moving from one location to another.
Mhm.
So I had pre and post data. And the post environment was actually specifically designed with health and well-being in mind. Um, and what was really interesting is that while many of the elements existed that what you would expect to see with that focus, so lots of biophilia, natural light, the access to stairs, all the things that do count, is that the bit that was missing that really the didn't, it could have been elevated to a whole new level, was the communications piece. Is that piece that or what is known as health promotion. So if you create these environments, you really need to work with people, when they move in and then ongoing in explain to them why the space has been designed a certain way, and then how to use it. So when I did different cohorts of, for example, how and why to use a desk and chair, those that had that training actually sat less. So, and those that were explained the importance and the value of taking the stairs a few times a day, used the stairs more versus those that the stairs were just there. So
Mm.
that was one of the key findings, is that it's not only important to create these environments, but you do need to communicate the value and importance of them on an ongoing basis. Because what might seem really obvious sometimes is not. We often need to be, as humans, need to know the why to see the value in things.
Yeah, I mean that is a kind of fascinating sort of idea because obviously as an architect, we always kind of think that people will see what we see, will understand what
Mm,
our intentions are between the decisions we make, and I always find it incredibly fascinating how I always well, I've done this anecdote before, but I always use my wife as an example of how a non-architect understands the world around her, and whenever we sit anywhere in a restaurant or something, the things that I notice versus the things that
mm.
she notices, sort of thing, and how she experiences the space versus how I experience the space, sort of thing,
Yeah,
and it is
yeah,
that thing of when you're a designer, you just kind of you presume it's implied or it's understood, but like you say, like
exactly.
the communication around it feels, yeah, like that missing piece.
Yeah, I totally agree, and there's so many examples of that, and that actually came out loud and clear in my research. So, and that salutogenic lens is actually focusing on that. You need to have a much more holistic view of projects, and really, in order to actually maximize their full potential. So really looking at all the factors rather than just the designed environment, all the other layers that make the environment, most effective in terms of health outcomes.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? When you think about all these conversations, and I'll come on to on the question later about sort of the different building standards that talk about the qualities that different office spaces should be, but I suppose the point is about the organization as a whole, and probably leading on to what you said previously about the ethos behind Herman Miller, the organization that sings at all levels through its ideology, its way of thinking, and through its sort of architecture and design sort of thing. It's not one without the other, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You need all of it to sing, don't you? For it to all
Mm.
make sense, particularly to the end user. That sometimes things that as designers make sense, just common sense that we just take for granted, but yeah, it's not. It needs to often be communicated. And I think, the other part that is often forgotten is that as designers that are focused on creating spaces, is that space
Mm.
can fix the problems, but you can have the most amazing spaces, but if the culture is not right or is not positive, then the space really is, come becomes secondary. So, yeah, there's obviously other elements.
So with this point in your career, you now have a shiny doctorate to move forward with, and you're specializing in workplace design. You then decide to sort of go out as a sort of consultant, and I know originally as an employee, and now as your own body sort of thing. What does your sort of work look like in that sort of consultancy, and what's your kind of day-to-day process of providing advice for, I guess, organizations and different companies looking for a different way of working, I suppose?
Well, at the moment, my work consists a lot of tend to do a lot of workshops. I feel co-designing and engaging people in an organization, whatever the outcome you're trying to achieve, is just so critical to success. Whether you're,
Mm.
I might be working with employees to create what they think is an effective health and wellbeing policy or strategy for their organization. Or it could actually be in terms of workplace strategy. So, what is the workplace? How do we want it to be? How do we work? How are we going to work in the future? Really identifying the key factors, the purpose of the workplace. And, there's so much research and evidence that we all know about that if you engage the end users, the employees, or those that are going to be actively impacted by the strategy, the policy, you have such better outcomes because people again understand from they have input, so they're invested in it. They will be more committed to it. They also understand the why. So they don't just turn up at day one and
True.
something is built or something is written and they're expected to adopt it or believe it, that if they've been part of it, that engagement and you can see it, and that's actually really rewarding when you see better outcomes that people and then in terms of the health and wellbeing strategy is that often you in smaller organizations, they might see health and wellbeing as something to the side. Is that, okay, here's our business. Oh, we know we need to look after our people. Let's have a little budget over there and we'll just do some, health and wellbeing stuff. Um, when you'll actually start embedding, working with people and showing them the evidence of what really does impact their health and start to be integrated into everyday business, that's when you start to see, not only leadership start to get on board, and everyone is much more aware of what actually does impact them. So using evidence too, I think, is really, really important.
How much do you find yourself sort of being asked questions and kind of held in a box to some degree? Like, are companies willing to kind of pick apart their processes? Because I can imagine you ask those sort of big questions about companies and why they are certain ways and how they work, sort of things. Are they Do they prefer to say, you stick to the health and well-being thing and we'll keep to our business, or are they willing to kind of look at the way they work generally, I suppose?
It varies, and I suppose in the first instance, they're not gonna appoint me as a consultant if they think that health and wellbeing is to the side. they're actually looking to improve outcomes for their employees in the first instance, or they're trying to make so often in projects now, there will be someone such as myself with that health and wellbeing evidence-based lens. So, here is the design, or here is the design brief. Do we have a strong lens or a strong understanding of the evidence to, support this design, that it is actually going to enable better health outcomes? So I think the people or the organisations that are interested in it and want and engage are thinking differently anyway. So it's
Mm.
almost the same way organisations are approaching AI. Those that, some people see AI as a thing over here that we can just, make things a little bit more efficient. But organisations that are actually progressive, it's embedding it into everyday business, everyday processes, everything that you're doing. And you're seeing those organisations will take off and be super successful. So
Sure.
it is getting your head around how it can be more integrated.
So how do we catch the organizations that are putting it to the side? Obviously, like you say, the ones that are employing you are ready and willing and embracing it. What are the
Yeah.
processes to improve the other 50%?
Oh, well, I wish I had that answer, because then I'd have a lot more clients. Look, I think it comes down to, like a lot of these things, it can be about connection. So, people I do often public speaking as well. People might see me, "Oh, what Kirsten is making sense to me. Yes, that makes a much more sense than the way we're currently approaching it. Maybe we need to look at things differently." That might be someone in a P&C or HR role. It might be an executive to say, yes, this makes sense to me. Let's do things differently. So I think 'cause some of it's awareness, some of it's, people keeping up with better ways of doing things or being more open. Any change or any improvement in an organization, or any organization that is putting employee health at the center, that just it starts like all these things. It starts with someone willing and wanting to, maybe improve outcomes for people.
Leading on to that point, and kind of what I mentioned previously, you have standards like WELL, Fitwel, which I know you have accreditation for as well. What roles do you think they play in all of these conversations? And I mean, as an architect, we've had hundreds of conversations with our clients previously about these standards and how they sort of promote different aspects, and each one probably goes slightly into different depths about whether it's just the design front or whether it's the organizational thing, and how that sort of works in a holistic way. How much do you think they are useful, push the conversation
Mm.
along, or are they more just about marketing and sales to potential leases?
Mm, I think they're super useful as a guide to, or providing a set of, checklists or frameworks to measure projects against. So it's similar to how we all had Green Star. I'm guessing you have Green Star, or with the Green Building Council of Australia, or the, world. There's a
Yeah,
standard
yeah,
for
we have
interiors.
BREEAM.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And when that first started, everyone really struggled with it. But now that's just become the standard, has been elevated, and that's just the way we do business now. That is the new standard. It's not a push to reach those environmental. So I think with these health standards, is the same thing, that some of it, it's elevating it, and those checklists, and it'll just become part of business as usual. The issue I have with both of the standards that currently exist, well, the 2 American ones, is they're very US focused, and there's no bending in terms of nuance for regional. So what is law here and is just a given is not law in the US, and you
Sure.
might have to go and prove a point where it's just law here, so you don't need to prove it because that's just the way we work. So I think they're valuable for designers and project consultants as that checklist. Whether you actually go to the cost and the significant expense of getting the actual stamp, um, yeah, I think the jury's, still out on that. The money that you spend on that certification could be, spent on actually using those funds to up the grade the building to make sure that the air quality is improved or whatever you're trying to focus on. So yeah, useful reference, but whether you need to have the stamp, I'm sure others would argue that the purpose of the stamp or the mark or that you have is that it indicates that you have a third party endorsement. That
Mm.
it's not you marking your own homework; it's actually a third party marking your work, and yes, I suppose that's where the value is for some people.
Yeah, I completely echo that, and in my experience with clients, it is that thing of actually signing up and getting the certification is the big scary number and the recurring costs and things like that. But
Yeah.
obviously, as a marketing tool, like you say, the for I guess people coming into the building to have something as that. I mean, are you finding, I suppose, that the clients are asking for these things? Obviously, I'm probably talking more biased from a developer-led, office
Mm.
building, for example, where they're putting in things rather than the sort of fit out. But is the if you're kind of pushing businesses, is the market side demanding these things?
No. So I did spend a couple of years working for one of the Australia's biggest landlords who owns the most commercial real estate, and we had these conversations. What's the value? Should we do it? I think that there's not enough awareness at the end, like the tenant end, so the end user end of the value of it. So
Yeah.
therefore, it was like, well, what, as a landlord, why would we get that building certified if the tenant doesn't see any value or doesn't know about it? So, I think the Fitwel standard is really the way it is set up. It's really accessible. It is based on some really, really solid evidence. They do have some really good checklists, and I really would love to see that because the way it is quite accessible. But there's no awareness of it in the Australian market, so therefore that's
Mm.
how it's viewed. So, okay, the landlord says, "Well, why should I go and get the stamp on the building if no one knows what it means?"
So, what are those? I mean, obviously, probably most of the people listening to this can kind of have a small understanding and a guess at what those sort of general health and well-being strategies could be within within office space. And like you say, the
Mm.
access to light, biophilia, walking up staircases. I think we could all kind of get on board with that. But what are those things that you're finding probably most recently and most pertinently kind of design changes or office structural things that you are finding, or you personally are pushing for as evidence
Mm.
based?
Well, I think in terms of the evidence, the factors that really impact people's health is the air quality and the access to
Mm.
daylight. So, access to daylight has a massive impact on people's quality of sleep, and as we know, sleep is a pretty one of the big pillars of good health. So, if people aren't getting enough daylight during their working hours, they will have it will you can develop sleep disorders or just have disordered sleep. And same with the air quality. So yes, the air quality is critical. So that really comes back to the base building. And there's issues. There's a balancing act that many asset owners have to cope with because in order to keep the buildings really energy efficient, so in order to keep them at a certain energy rating, that controls how much fresh air intake you're having, what temperature you're setting the building. All your mechanical systems need to be operating at a certain level to keep them running efficiently. Now, sometimes that is incongruent with the level of, fresh air intake.
Mm.
That if you actually wanted to really clean up and really have a super high quality air, the energy required to do that becomes much greater. So then we're left in that balancing. Okay, how do we, unless more contemporary buildings, more modern buildings, of course, are much more efficient now. So that's not so much of an issue. But with the bulk of the market being, buildings that are over 20 years old, that there's only so efficient without really cranking the mechanical systems, and then you're dealing with the issues associated with, climate issues relating to too much
Mm.
energy consumption. It's a balance, like everything, isn't it?
Like everything. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
How much do you find the sustainability angle sits amongst this? Because obviously we'd like to think that, sustainability sits holistically with health and well-being and
Yep.
they're all singing from the same hymn sheet. But like you say, you've just used an example where maybe those two things are, sort of fighting.
Yeah. Look, they go hand in hand. I mean, obviously, if we have, healthy humans is a healthy planet, and vice versa. A healthy planet will make healthy humans. So, the focus on sustainability in Australia is reasonable. Mandatory reporting of carbon has just commenced. So that
Mhm.
now changes the dial, the focus. Now projects are much more focused, right? There's two columns on projects now. We've got the financial column, and then we've got the carbon column. So decisions are not just 100% based on, I don't know, Europe and you guys have been doing it for a long time. We're getting there. We're getting on board now. Um, but that takes, and you probably have experience of this too, it takes time for it to be bedded down and become part of everyday business. So, um, there is, and now, many of the large landlords that own these commercial assets are, reporting to their shareholders. Shareholders, particularly all the superannuation companies, own a lot of these assets. People are asking questions about the environmental responsibility, the social responsibility. So it's shining a lot more light on it. There's a much more focus. We're getting there and we're making progress. But the issue around there's still a lot of short term decision making,
Mm.
particularly in a market where you've got low occupancy, just post COVID mop up. Um, Dealing when you're a landlord and you just need to get the building full, you'll, you know, cut corners or do whatever's required to make it so, rather than thinking about long-term sustainability outcomes.
With that sort of point about sort of post-COVID, that you just made, how how have you sort of seen it over the last couple of years? And obviously, we're kind of in this kind of strange period where we're now looking at pushing workers back into the office, and I suppose it must be being an incredibly kind of interesting time for you
Mm.
to kind of understand the impact of home working, and now sort of this, this period of now sort of post-home working where, people are dragging their feet back into the office, and I suppose the potential draw or improvement or unimprovement on people's health and well-being by being back in those spaces, rather than more working flexibly.
Mm. Well, it was interesting. I was finishing my research, my PhD, pretty much just in the beginning stretches of COVID, and there was already some research starting to appear. And what was unfortunate that while people didn't have commute times, they had an extra hour or two in their day, that they weren't replacing that time with, doing something good for themselves or their family, walking, doing whatever with their families or on their own. They were just replacing it with more work. So, which was a shame because we had that moment to actually, for some people they did improve their health outcomes, but most of the research showed that that didn't happen. We didn't replace it with,
Mm.
looking after ourselves. And I think that now that, we're on the other side of the tired conversation around hybrid, no hybrid, what are we doing, more productive, productive. I
Mm.
feel like that the conversation has moved to be much more focused on the value of humans being together in one space,
Mm.
the value of us being connected, the value of how ideas and things happen when humans are physically together. And
Mm.
recognizing that being at home, while we all did get work done because we had no choice, yes, things happened and life went on, because that we're all in it together, that it has led to, a lot of issues around, loneliness and disconnection. One of the pieces of research I spent a bit of time looking at is that blurred line between work and home that we didn't have before,
Mm.
that people appreciated that time on their commute that they had to themselves. So for many, that was their time in the day where they could tune out, put music on, read a book, whatever they did before they into the home environment, they had that break.
Sure.
They had that
Yeah.
stop and start. Then when you have a blurred when the line is blurred, is then it was sort of many employers felt like, "Oh, well, you're of course, you're available all the time now because you're"
Mm.
you know? So that blurred line does have an impact, and it needs to be really carefully managed, and that's a personal responsibility to, put those boundaries up. So I think the net outcome I feel like where we're settling, has made a massive improvement into people's health and well-being, because we
Mm.
can now start to see that you get the benefit of connection and being together with others a few days a week. We have the benefit of possibly being at home and having, if we're depending on our personality, we can have that home environment isn't now extension of the office versus the other way around, that if we
Mm.
need to do quiet work and concentrate and disconnect, we have the opportunity to do that for periods in a remote environment, and that we can hopefully use those days to focus more on ourselves where we don't have the commute time. So the other benefit, of course, is that if your work environment doesn't have the cleanest air, or, you're sitting in the dark corner,
Mm.
that you're mitigating any if your work environment isn't A grade, you're mitigating it because 'cause you're not there 5 days a week. So,
Mm.
and the other way around, some people might be living in tiny apartments or places that aren't ideal to be in 5 days a
Mm.
week either. So, yeah, you're getting the benefit of both environments, I think, where I feel like it's settling and will make sense for everyone.
Do you find that that is now also part of the conversation that you're having with companies? The health and well-being conversation is about that flexibility inherent, and that's has proven benefits, I suppose.
Yeah, yes, definitely. The conversation around hybrid working and this sort of, mandating or no mandating or return to the office was this conversation around trust. Oh, I
Mm.
need to have you in the office because I don't trust you, or
Yeah.
which of course is a fundamental pillar of any working relationship, or whether it's a marriage or an employee, trust is fundamental. But the conversation has now moved beyond that, and yes, people do ask me, "Okay, what is the to achieve employee optimal health, what's the right
Mm.
balance? What's how many days in, out?"
Mm. Yeah.
There's no
What's the secret?
scientific Yeah, what's the secret? What's the scientific formula? I need to know if my people are in 22 hours a week, that they're gonna be at optimal performance. Because again, we're dealing with humans. Every human's different. The work that we do, the way we deal with our managers and the people around us is unique on every day and is constantly moving. There's no magic formula.
Mm.
And I think it just comes back to some of those fundamental, if there is that trust relationship, depending on the work that you do too, is it most effective? In the case of design and architecture, it's probably most effective done for many of us together, because you're in the business of ideas and problem solving. And
Mm.
again, that can be most effectively done together. If you're more of a processing type person, you might be, not being with your colleagues all the time might be okay for the role you do. So it depends so much on, and I think it's also another big factor around health is life stage. Depending on where
Mm.
you are in your career and whether you're having families or not, does have a massive impact on what people's commitments are outside their work.
Yeah.
And it and that does and, a lot of there's a lot of conversations in the workshops that I do around that piece, is that people that have high commitments outside work, whether they're training for the Olympics, have young children, whatever they're doing, are often marked down for lack of commitment to the organization or passion for the job,
Mm.
because they're not there 60 hours a week. But
Mm.
often that's not the case. They are very passionate, very committed, and they're committed the time that they're there, but they have a really full life outside work. So it's really important I think, to recognize that, from that, particularly that well-being lens.
And do you think you sort of feel that from personal experiences, like you spoke about with your landscape architect career? And I know personally, as an architect with 3 kids and one of them disabled, like it is, life having being a full life outside of work is an incredibly difficult thing to manage alongside a creative
Exactly.
career.
Totally, and that's probably one of the reasons why I put it to the side in the end because it didn't align, and, having a husband who had a really big job, one of us had to be the primary carer or, be at home, someone's gotta do it, and, at the time, I found that quite difficult that I sort of had to take step back,
Mm.
um but now what is really fantastic is good to know is that I now have young adult children who have actually said, "Thanks, mum. We know they've recognized that. They actually say, "We know that you took a step back. We know that you made career choices, putting us at the front." At the time, it's not that easy to do that, but now I'm glad I did do it.
I remind my children to say that to their mother in their when they're a bit
Yeah,
older.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, at the end of the day, when you leave the planet, it's not about the job that you had. It's the legacy of your children or other legacies that you'll be remembered for. So I suppose that's if you really step back and look at your career as part of, yourself on the planet, that's what it probably counts more.
With that in mind, and you've wrapped it up quite nicely in a bow. Looking at your career journey, what do you think those key lessons that you found are? And I suppose obviously talking to you has been, fascinating, and you've had lots of different career points, and obviously, you're our first doctor that's been on the show. Um, what do you think are those kind of key lessons that you can take away from that sort of that wiggly career path you've taken?
I suppose never stop learning. And I know I'm probably on the extreme end that I've, done so much formal study, but I thrive on that. I really enjoy just learning and just hearing different things and different perspectives and going in different directions. Um, and I suppose what it gives you is you get a really good sense of how things are put together and in a much broader context. And you can, I mean, even if you study one path, of course, you can understand life from different perspectives. I suppose it's given me that. But I do also admire people that have studied a particular vocation and done that because they become absolute experts in their game. When you see architects that have been architects for 30 years, they are really, really good. They're really, really, and sometimes any career, what makes you good at it is actually just longevity, like doing it for a long time. There's a lot of stuff, as you know, as a practicing architect that you just can't know without experience, with time.
Yeah, without doing it, without living it. Mm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think that, yeah, never stop learning, and whether that's on the job learning, um, having an open mindset is really fundamental, particularly in the modern world. You'll be left behind if you really need to anything that comes at you, any amount of change, go with the change. Change is good. Keep an open mindset. That will help you, get through anything that's presented to you that might seem really difficult or, you know,
Mm.
um, different to the way you think. On the other side, there'll be some valuable learning, and it will open a door or another pathway for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a sort of beautiful mindset to kind of see change and challenge as a sort of positive and something to thrive on rather than, being scared of it sort of thing.
Yeah.
With all of this in mind, has your career unfolded in a way that you could have imagined or had any element of planning to?
No. In a nutshell,
I mean,
I
that's okay.
probably
There's not a
yeah,
right or
yeah,
wrong
yeah,
answer.
there's no right answer. I suppose maybe when I was younger, I was quite focused on, really having quite a clear pathway and progressing, step up
Mm.
and, managing this and growing and developing. But that's how I saw the growing and developing by moving up, whereas I've probably moved about, and found that equally as rewarding and enriching. So yeah, I think that any pathway doesn't need to necessarily, and for some people that is important. Moving up,
Mm.
having more people, more responsibility, that is important to them. But I started out probably with that intention, and then have just enjoyed the different path. Even though I feel like there is a common thread throughout it, exactly your question at the
Mm.
beginning around
Yeah, yeah.
focusing on people. Um, but yeah, I think that it's all interesting, it's all learning, it's all sort of part of work and part of life.
And with that in mind, what's next?
What is next? Look, I feel like I'm at a place now where I can actually fully commit to the work that I'm doing. Again, now that
Mm.
I'm on the other side of children, that I have my capacity to think. It's amazing when you don't have family logistics operating. When you're not operating a whole
You've had a
universe on
good
the
night's
outside.
sleep as well, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you get a good night's sleep, you can think straight, you can actually think much deeper, for much more longer periods of time, you're not disrupted. So I feel like it's focusing, yeah, more of the same and really becoming, a true expert in when it comes to how the environment does impact and the workplace does impact people's health and well-being. And that's just through, again, more some of it's just formal research, some of it's connecting, it's doing projects. Every project that you do, you learn something. So, I feel like it's and of course, yeah, a little bit of, a bit more fun, not working. I don't need to work 60 hours. Doing a more I'm actually starting to do a lot more local volunteering, which again is really enriching. I haven't had the capacity to do that, so love the
Mm.
fact that I can connect with my community, um, that I haven't been able to do before. So, yeah, I think really focusing in on where my skill set is now, and yeah, having some other interests outside work. Um, yeah, it's not just all work.
Kirsten, thank you so much for joining me. Absolutely fascinating conversation, and hopefully lots to take away from that.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's really interesting questions too. So, yeah, hopefully
Well, I
that
try.
is. Yeah, no, well, this is obviously something that you're really interested in and passionate about, and I'm sure it is really interesting from your perspective, hearing all the different stories that people have to tell.
Exactly. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.